Hi, my name is Lana. Welcome to my YouTube channel. And on this channel, we review books. And today's book review is Thirst for Salt by Madelaine Lucas. This is a book I actually read, I think I read it in September. And it was a release. This is a debut novel for Lucas, released last year. And I want to say it was released over the summer, which makes sense because it's predominantly taking place on the beach, an Australian beach. And man, I'm actually surprised I'm not seeing more people talk about this debut. This, spoiler alert, fantastically written novel. Best novel I've ever read? No, but I'm surprised because there's a large group of readers who read this type of narrative. And however, this narrative is doing what some of these other narratives don't do. So, in a nutshell, let me stop being cryptic. Let me jump into the review so I can get my point across. Who is to say what love is or what it wants to be, the shape it takes, or how quickly it comes on? Love has always made a fool of time. So, in A Thirst for Salt, the narrator, who is unnamed, is on holiday one summer with her mother when she meets a man 20 years her senior. They begin a relationship, and as the narrator reflects back on her relationship with Jude, who is the man's name, she muses over these concepts of memory, the passage of time, and how love can distort both time and perception. So the reason why I say that this book has a group, it's that there is and I see a lot of millennial fiction. She's a millennial. This trope of these relationships that don't work out, and there's an emphasis on the age difference between the man and the woman. Typically, it's the guy who is significantly older than this young 20-something. We see it in a lot of Sally Rooney's. We see it in conversations with friends. Lucas is doing something a little bit different here, and it's refreshing, and it's less tropey, in my opinion. I think part of that is also because she is a fantastic writer. But let's get into some of these themes because this book is beautifully written. It's not complicated, but it's well written. Their narrator is recalling her relationship with Jude so she's reflecting back on when she's in her 20s. We don't necessarily know how old she is during this reflection, but she's definitely a more mature woman. And by mature, I don't necessarily mean that she's 50, 60 years old, plus just more mature in her thinking. But we do know she was recounting these events from her this time period while she was in her 20s with Jude. She spends a lot of time talking about the passage of time. She is a woman who desired a more traditional life. She wanted the marriage. She desired the marriage. She desired the children. She thought she had that opportunity when she met Jude. And it's clear that those desires did not come to pass. So there is this melancholy throughout the work, and I think it's very realistic. So Lucas does show that there are many ways in which we keep time beyond the traditional calendar or the traditional clock. Our bodies keep the time. When it comes to, especially our narrator, that window for her to be able to have children, that's a passage of time. She's thinking of time in the terms of her own fertility. But also, when we fall in love, how we view time changes. Our concept of time becomes centered around this other individual. And it becomes more fluid and subjective because their time has become our time. We're yearning for their time. If we can't always get it, it's this weird, abstract place to be in. I was asking a question about fertility, which is to ask a question about time. For time in the absence of someone you love cannot be measured in the same way as regular time. 3 days, 2 weeks, a month or more, what difference does it make? It was all interminable. Love, I still believe, exists outside of time, or it is its own time. It takes its own measures, not in minutes or hours or calendar days, but in something closer to seasons or tidal movements. All winter long, we've been suspended in it, marking the weeks by watering the plants, marking the months by blood. This is what I mean when I say that Lucas is a really, really good writer. a lot of the themes in this book weave together. So yes, we're having this conversation about time. She also shows how, with this fluidity of time and how it's subjective, perception and memory are also subjective. Subjectivity is the overarching concept here. The narrator is so infatuated with Jude that she willingly, and in some cases I think unwillingly, overlooks certain things about him. Only in hindsight is she able to go back and see how her love for him overshadowed some things in reality. Oftentimes, love can make us overlook things that we wouldn't have otherwise made allowances for. I think that we can all relate to that. But also, I heard a lady, I will say this, say something really, really wise a few weeks ago. She was saying how you have to, well, and I'm adding this and then I'm going to say what she said. You have to know what you're able to put up with and what you're not able to put up with. Some people have what's a red flag for one person is not a red flag for others. Some people just are able to deal with certain things and some people aren't. But what did this lady say? She was saying how some people almost have a supernatural ability to love certain types of people. It's almost like they were designed for it. And so again, I take stuff like this with a little bit of grain of salt. You never know what's going on behind the scenes with somebody's relationship. But I think that we can all, or like, why would that person put up with such and such? How could they not see that? You don't know. And also, again, we've all made allowances for people when we shouldn't have because of love, right? There is this thing called being unconditional, especially when there's a history there. But in some cases, some things just didn't work out. And that's okay. I hope that made sense. But in this case, she saw how Jude just couldn't let there were these red flags with Jude. And through her own youth, and in maybe cases, some of her own insecurity, maybe there were instances where she felt like, can't believe this man is with me. And so she was able to overlook some things at that time. But Jude is also a very, very closed off character. If Jude was a house, I sensed that he held many hidden rooms. He had turned the light on in only one of them, and he made me feel so welcome, so warm, that I'd forgotten about all the other places left in the dark. I loved best in gestures and metaphors, and I wanted to build a life out of what I loved. Metaphors are lies, one of my professors had said in a lecture during my first year of university. How then, I might argue with her now, is the absence of figurative language? Are we supposed to talk about love? Love, we say, and expect the word to hold so many things. Memory is funny like that, the way it distorts distance. But it was also possible that she loved only the memory of the man she'd loved before. I will say this. There's a lot of comment or quotes, love, love, love. This isn't a narrative that is ooey gooey, sugary sweet, bubblegum pop. It's not sappy. It's not cheesy. It's not a romance. I wouldn't call this a romance. This is a relationship that did not work for whatever reason. I don't want to spoil it. And so this isn't this type of ooey gooey romance type of love that's not the vibe that Lucas is going for. It's quite melancholy, actually. And again, I think it's relatable because most people have been in at least one relationship or a situationship where only in hindsight, in time and distance, can the person look back and say, how did I not see it? And sometimes they can look back once they're in something that's maybe there is some unhealthy, there is definitely some unhealthy stuff going on in this relationship between the narrator and Jude. And so I think in some cases you can look back when you're in something healthy, you can look back and say, oh, that wasn't healthy. So there's always this reflection, this distortion, this hindsight is 20/20. You're always processing. So I do find Lucas's portrayal to be very, very realistic. Lastly, this is going to be a pretty short review because, like I said, I don't think that this narrative is overly complicated. I think it's pretty straightforward. It's gorgeously written. The themes are timeless. We see these themes a lot. But one more theme before I wrap up, I want to talk about the ocean and salt symbolism that Lucas weaves in throughout this whole novel. And I love ocean, water symbolism in a narrative, and narratives that take place on the coast. She litters it throughout the whole work, but in a way that is not hitting the nail over the head. There's a fine balance between the two. She nailed it, okay? It's not obnoxious. It's throughout the narrative, and it's well done. The symbolism, this constant ocean and salt symbolism, emphasizes the instability in Jude and the narrator's relationship. There is a scripture actually in the Bible that tells you to not build your house on the sand. Why? You can't have a sturdy foundation on sand. Sand shifts, right? So she also uses biblical imagery, Lucas does, from a particular Bible story in the Old Testament about Lot and his wife. So Lot and his wife and their family were given time to leave Sodom and Gomorrah because God was going to destroy this Sodom and Gomorrah for its complete and utter depravity. And they were given instructions. Lot's life was given specific instructions to not look back at the city that they were leaving. The city was getting destroyed. She looked back and she was turned into a pillar of salt. So what does that mean? You can't look. There are certain situations in your life where you cannot look back. You let go and you keep it moving forward. You can't look at the past. The past is dead. Let the dead bury the dead. The only way you can go forward is to put on blinders in some cases, follow directions, let this be, keep it going. So she's comparing herself to Lot's wife throughout the narrative. She's constantly looking back and thinking about this relationship. I thought that was really clever. I've never seen that comparison used in this way before with Lot's wife in this type of story, and I thought it was pretty cool. So for so long I have lived like the woman in the parable, looking back to see whatever ruins lay behind me. If I had remained at Sailor's Beach and had a child with Jude, if I had married him, as I once imagined I would, my bridal chain would have been made of salt and sand. Again, she's telling you that even though this is something that she really wanted and she thought that she wanted it, she wanted a marriage, she wanted a more traditional life, she wanted the child, but because of the type of man that Jude is really kind of a free spirit. He doesn't really like to be tied down too much. Her relationship would not have been sturdy. Navigating the waves was intuitive. There was a rhythm to it. I knew when to use strength and when to surrender, when to rise over or dive beneath. In the waves, I could lie back and trust that they would hold me. I could let myself be held. That steadiness that I took to be strength, his consistency, I realized now was a kind of boundary, a way of drawing a line in the sand, like a sprinkling of salt at the threshold. It was a kind of spell to keep himself safe and changed. Again, so much salt in ocean imagery. The ocean is constantly moving and changing. Lucas does describe the beach and the ocean as it's changing throughout the seasons in this narrative. And again, all of that is symbolic to this relationship. And I'm going to wrap it up. I don't think this needs to be belabored. I thought that as a debut, this was a beast of a first novel. It's expertly written, and it doesn't feel like a debut at all. And I think that is because Lucas is a writing teacher. She teaches at a university. Actually, is she at NYU? Columbia. Sorry, she teaches fiction at Columbia. You can tell. She's from Australia, Sydney, but she currently lives in Brooklyn. And you can tell that this was fine-tuned and fine-tuned and fine-tuned. This does not read as a debut novel. And this feels fresh and mature when it comes to this type of trope, like I said earlier, where you have the older man and the younger 20-something. This feels mature to me. Not quite so tropey. Lucas actually said she had no intention of writing a novel at first. I watched a podcast episode with her being interviewed, and I think it had started off initially as short stories, and then when she looked, I think she said I might be wrong, I'm kind of going off memory here, when she looked, maybe it's like, oh, I think this is actually a novel waiting to be told, and so she had to go and almost start over. And I think from my memory, I want to say it was a total of 10 years of work. That includes the initial short stories and all that stuff, so you can tell that this was a labor of love. And I just thought that it was really, really well done and put together. And I eagerly await any potential novel. I hope she releases now a future novel, and I would be curious to see what she does. I gave this a 4 and a 5 out of 5, and if you know me, that is very, very high, especially for a contemporary release. So with that, have you read Thirst for Salt? Have you even heard of Thirst for Salt? I am surprised that Thirst for Salt does not have more readers, more content around it. I think it would be very popular. I'm kind of surprised by that. But if so, please let me know. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram, where I get up to more book shenanigans. I post all of my book reviews there first, and I post goofy things in the Instagram stories because I can. And with that, I am going to sign out. Bye.